Today on Sagittarian Matters, 2 interviews with Trina Robbins, featuring Lee Mars and Mary Wings. Stay tuned.
Sagittarian Matters, Sagittarian Matters, what's the matter with you? Sagittarian Matters.
Hello from the Sagittarian Matters social distancing studios, recorded live on the floor of a closet in Waterville, Maine. Listeners, today we are remembering beloved friend to the show, Trina Robbins, who passed away this week at age 85. I met Trina about 10 years ago, and I kind of haven't stopped interviewing her since. I met up with her to attempt to republish all of her original 70s comics for her, and hallelujah, she was already doing that. So then we just got to be friends. I interviewed Trina for the podcast in 2016, prior to the election of the Rotting Pumpkin, and then I interviewed her live at Root Division in San Francisco in 2017 with feminist comic pioneers Lee Mars and Mary Wings. We're going to be reposting both of those interviews here for you. Over the years, I had Trina come visit my class at California College of the Arts, which is in San Francisco. And so for the past 10 years, every summer, I've had the true pleasure of having Trina, Mary, and Lee assemble as what they call the Sister Act to speak to my students about being pioneers of feminist and gay comics. Trina's entire life has been spent lifting up the voices of women and marginalized creators and making sure that those who came before her are not lost to history. She's a historian, she's a publisher, a writer, a cartoonist. She was one of the first women to draw Wonder Woman, and she was so generous to come to my school every single summer. I really want you to take note that Trina really comes alive when she's talking about her projects, everything that she loves to do, and also when she was with Lee Mars and Mary Wings. They were not only a sister act that I was lucky enough to have assemble every summer. Even if they hadn't seen each other all year, they really looked forward to it and said yes without delay. But also, I really like listening to them talk with each other about what it was like to make comics in the 1970s. These women that have continued to make comics and continue to make art, even now, till 2024. And Trina, up until the very end, she just published an anthology about reproductive rights and justice and bodily autonomy. So please enjoy these talks, and please know that we were so lucky and privileged and honored to get to have Trina on the podcast multiple times. And I was so happy to have her in my classroom. I wanted to say one more thing, which is every year when I had her in my class, it didn't matter who they were, even students who had been glaring at me all semester, like not totally buying it, something softened in them when these 3 women showed up. And specifically when Trina started talking about her history and, her methodology for how she lives her life, students would brighten up. They would wait in line to have her sign their books after class. They would ask her questions, rush out the door to help her find her way to the classroom as she got off the bus. They would, argue with each other about who got to drive her home. It was really special for all of us. And so I hope that you get a little piece of that specialness when you listen to these interviews. And also, please draw a picture of her or light a candle, hold your wands to the sky, say a little metta prayer for Trina Robbins tonight, a good friend to the show who will be very sorely missed. Thank you.
Hi.
Thanks for being on the podcast.
I am delighted.
I'm so happy this book came out, these books.
I am so happy they came out, yes.
So, but I will tell my listeners that I met you because I wanted to put out these books a couple of years ago after I was at the Center for Cartoon Studies, and Steve Bissett lent me a giant stack of women's comics and It Ain't Me, Babe and Tits and Clits. And it was the best thing I had ever read. and I couldn't believe that they weren't reprinted in full. So then I was like, I have to go track down Trina Robbins because I have to make sure these get put out. And then we went to breakfast, and then you said, Fantagraphics is already doing it. And I felt so relieved.
Yes, of course. Everything good eventually gets reprinted.
Thank God. Let's start way, way, way back, and then we'll come to the present. So even now, as a female cartoonist, I feel like I feel the repercussions of R. Crumb style misogyny kind of around me and in the psyches of cartoonists that I encounter. So I wonder...
Oh, I'm sorry. You think it's still there? Give me some examples.
I don't know.
If you don't mind me interviewing you, go on.
Please interview me. I guess just the idea of a lot of people hold him in very high regard because he's an excellent draftsman and because he helped originate underground cartoon comics. But
yes,
his images are so violent and so intense that it's really hard for me to hear people talk about how he's the best cartoonist ever when I think about all the people that are kind of squashed down in his work or, shown poorly in his work.
But is that misogyny?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. The idea of somebody saying like this borderline racist art or this like sexist art is one of my favorite artists makes me feel weird. I guess.
I really wonder how many people have seen it was his early stuff, the stuff he did in the 70s and 80s that was the most offensive. And I wonder how many people have seen that aside from a group of aging fans.
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, those things are burned into my mind as strong comics can be. So those are things I think about when people are like worshiping at the altar of this person.
Yeah.
But so, okay.
Well,
go ahead.
No, well, I mean, it's undeniable that he's an excellent draftsman and a really good artist. But it's also undeniable that in the 70s and 80s, he drew stuff that basically, unfortunately, influenced the underground so that the entire underground, not the entire, but an awful lot of the underground, felt they had to do violently misogynist stuff too.
Well, so then I wonder for you, I mean, that seems like a very unwelcoming climate for female cartoonists or people of color. So then how did you make your space?
It was extremely unwelcoming. And the fact that I objected to this kind of art, not just Crumbs, but underground in general, that I said rape isn't funny, torture and degradation of women is not funny. And they would say, well, you have no sense of humor and it's just satire. So that didn't make me popular with the guys, and they didn't invite me into their books or into their social lives or into their parties. Okay, what period are we talking about now?
I guess I was thinking about the climate of when you started women's comics or when you started working with It Ain't Me, Babe.
So the very earliest 70s. So what happened in 1970 was, these guys were not printing me, but I had come from New York to San Francisco, which was supposed to be the mecca of underground comics. And luckily, what happened was the underground newspapers heard I was here, that I was in town, and they phoned me and asked me to contribute to their newspapers. So I wound up, first I would come, it was the Berkeley Tribe, the Red Mountain Tribe, which was an offshoot of the Berkeley Barb. And every couple of weeks when they would do their layouts and paste ups, I would come to the office and just draw little spot illustrations, right there. We need this, we need an illustration this size, and I would just draw it. And, I think I was paid the grand sum of like $20. I don't remember now, but it was not a lot of money. But that wasn't the point, because I needed to be printed and I needed someone to want to publish me. And it was shortly after that I saw the first issue of It Ain't Me, Babe, which I have since found out was the very first feminist underground newspaper in the country. And I had not realized that. I thought it was the first in the West Coast, but it was the first in the country. And I phoned them and I said, I'd like to contribute. And we met at a be-in in Golden Gate Park. And I was wearing a T-shirt I had designed that had an angry-looking superheroine on it and said Super Sister, and they thought the T-shirt was really cool. I've looked for the T-shirt. I can't find it. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in the house. But anyway, they said, yes, join us. So at that point, I was, I said a tearful, really not a tearful, but a thankful goodbye to the Red Mountain Tribe, and started attending layout and paste up days at It Ain't Me Babe in Berkeley. I did a comic for them, a back page comic. I did a number of covers and a number of interior illustrators, and it was great to work with people I felt good about, who were feminists. It was fantastic. And at a certain point, I finally felt brave enough with the moral support of these women that I could put together the world's first, the universe's first, the world's first, all-woman comic book. And that was It Ain't Me Babe, 1970.
Oh, my God. I feel you're like a dreamboat to me. Like, the idea that you did these things just fills me with so much joy as a female cartoonist. Any of these things without role models and without people treading the path before me, it's harder to be able to see what is possible.
It's very hard to see what's possible. Not anymore, though.
No, we're in a really different time. And I feel like I almost have to go out of my way to tell students or younger people, like, it wasn't that long ago that things were radically different.
1970 to me seems like yesterday. But it's fantastic. Never in my wildest dreams, I swear to you, had I ever dreamed that there would be so many women in comics, that there would be more women publishing graphic novels than men. And that is fantastic.
Is that the case right now?
Yeah. Yes.
That's awesome. I wanted, of course, to talk about how you published the first lesbian comic.
Yes, Sandy Comes Out.
Sandy Comes Out. And then did you get guff from lesbians for publishing the first lesbian comic, or were they happy? Because you were not a lesbian, but it was about a lesbian.
Okay, Sandy was my roommate. And I for the first issue of Women's Comics, I thought it would be cool to tell her story. So I really did this with Sandy's approval. And in fact, I gave her the originals once the story was published, and which is kind of sad because Sandy died in Seattle, and I don't know what happened to the originals. Yeah, I know. And I'm just sad that Sandy died to start with, and that my originals are lost on top of that. But anyway, it was with Sandy's approval. She even suggested some of the captions and what would go into the word balloons in certain parts. And when I did it, I wasn't thinking in terms of, gee, this is the first comic about a lesbian. I was just thinking, I want to tell Sandy's story. The first comic about a lesbian bit didn't even occur to me until many years later when people were saying, wow, first comic about a lesbian. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I don't know about most of the feedback, but I do know my friend Mary Wings, who self-published the first all lesbian comic book by her, Come Out Comics, and also Dyke Shorts. And I do know that Mary read women's comics and saw that comic and was, in those days, quite indignant. And her attitude was, humph, this is obviously done by a straight woman. How dare she talk about lesbians? And so she did, so that inspired her to do her own book. So that's great. And of course, we're great friends now. At the Queer Comics Conference last May, we were roommates, and I had the greatest time with her. I had such fun with her.
I was so happy to see you guys there on the panel. And then I had you come to my class at the California College of the Arts. That was such a treat. And was it in your slideshow where you showed the Angela Davis slide?
Yes.
Did you draw that?
Yes, of course I drew that. Why would I show it if I hadn't drawn it?
I couldn't remember if it was you or Mary that heard that.
No, it was me. It was the back cover for one of the issues of It Ain't Me, Babe. And the idea was you were supposed to put it up in your front window to let her know, because she was wanted by the police. Excuse me. And nobody knew where she was. So my romantic notion is there she is, walking down the street, with her coat collar turned up, and she sees the sign, and she knocks on the door, and whoever, has put the sign up, in my case, me, shelters her from the cops. It was a very romantic notion, but people did put it up.
Oh my God, I wish I had that right now. I would put it in my window. Even if she was like on a speaking tour or something.
Wouldn't that be nice? Yes.
If Angela Davis wanted to use my bathroom or have a glass of water or...
Exactly. Angela, if just a cup of coffee, you feel the need for a cup of coffee, see my sign, come on over.
I'm going to start putting pictures of other people who I would like to stop in my window too. So soon you won't even be able to see in or see out because I'll have pictures of different people. I'll be like, Obama, are you on a visit?
Oh, he's definitely, if he can use my bathroom anytime.
Would you like to pet a chihuahua? Come into my house. So then I was going to ask, after you started publishing It Ain't Me, Babe, in women's comics, did the men come around, or were they threatened by what you were doing? Like, did you have to make your own space and then keep on that, or was there a time when they wanted you in their men's club?
Oh, they never wanted me in their men's club, never. But what happened was, in the beginning, it was a small group of guys. I mean, you could count the underground cartoonists in San Francisco on the fingers of, okay, maybe both hands, but that would be it. You wouldn't need any more fingers than that. But as the comics industry grew larger, as more people, started doing comics, doing their own comics, by the end of the 70s, by even the middle of the 70s, there were a whole bunch of new guys doing comics, and they didn't know that I was supposed to be a man-hating feminazi bitch, so they liked me. And so they invited me into their comics.
Oh.
So it was really a short period. It was just the beginning of the 70s when I was kind of persona non grata.
Oh, wow. And then what happened with all the women you were affiliated with? Did you all end up sticking together when it came to conventions and publishing, or?
That was cool, really. Because when we did women's comics, there were still so few women in the industry. And the first, I guess it was called the Berkeley Con. I don't remember now, but it was the first underground comic convention. And we were all there. We did a panel. Not only us, but the Tits and Clits ladies showed up. Because what was so cosmic, it's California really, was that on either side of this state, at the same time, there were women who finally decided they wanted to react to the sexism and misogyny in men's comics by putting out their own comics. And we didn't even know about each other. We didn't know about Tits and Clits till it appeared on the newsstand. And they didn't know about us. And of course, they came to the Berkeley Con, I think it was 1973. And, we all made friends. We loved each other.
I love that so much. I love both of those books. I can't even imagine being able to, you just go to the newsstand and then you see all of a sudden, a different radical feminist comic book of people that live a few hours away. Oh, no big deal. Great. And then, so you had Mary Wings and the people that are doing lesbian comics.
Yes.
And you had women's comics and you had Tits and Clits.
Yes.
And you all were allies for each other?
I would say so, sure, yeah. I mean, like I said, there were so few of us in those days that we definitely stuck together. The first big San Diego comic convention that I went to was 77, and an enormous amount of the women's comics women were there. And as were the Tits and Clits women, Joyce Farmer and Lynn Shevley. And they, after that, we mostly went to the San Diego conventions every year.
Oh, that's so cool. I find a lot of strength in numbers with ladies.
Strength in numbers, definitely. Oh, it's so nice to not be alone. Yes.
And were you the first woman to draw Wonder Woman? Is that true?
No.
Oh.
Ramona Fraden drew Wonder Woman in the Super Friends comic book in the 70s. I have an issue that she signed for me.
Oh, because I asked my students, I'm teaching a college course right now on comics, and I wanted to know what they wanted to know from you. And one of them thought that you were the first woman to draw Wonder Woman. They're like, I wonder what that felt like. But you were a woman to draw Wonder Woman.
I was a woman who drew Wonder Woman. I was one of the first. I mean, certainly, I don't know if there was someone after Ramona, but I wouldn't ever call myself the first. One of the first is fine.
I think that's still pretty huge. That's great. And at some point, you stopped drawing comics and focused mostly on writing comics.
That's right. That's what I'm doing now.
How long did you draw for before you stopped, and why did you stop?
I kind of stopped around the early 90s, around the same time that women's comics ended. I never really had a good relationship with the underground, even though later there were more people who liked me. But they tended to not be my kind of people. There was a lot of drug taking, a lot of drinking. I don't drink. I haven't even smoked pot for years. Last time I smoked pot was when I was getting chemotherapy in 2009, and it does help. But I haven't smoked it since. I mean, and I don't smoke cigarettes. I'm a healthy person. Mm-hmm. And they just, a lot of the underground just was not my crowd, as it were. And there was a lot of alienation between me and them. And women's comics had been my safe place. It really was. It was a place where I was friends with the women cartoonists, where we'd go out for coffee together. We'd hang out, and it felt good. And then it ended. And a lot of the women just moved away. And for a brief time, I was doing maybe a single page or two for a couple of other comics, like Angela Bocage put out something called Real Girl, and I did stuff for her. But I wasn't being asked to be in other comics. I didn't have a place to go. And I felt kind of like I didn't fit. So it got to me, really. So at a certain point, I really couldn't pick up a pencil and look at a piece of paper to draw without feeling very stressed, depressed, feelings of anxiety. I mean, it wasn't good. Mm-hmm. So I turned to writing, and I love writing. I love writing, and I feel good about it. And people like my writing.
I was just having to explain to someone yesterday, sometimes you have to revalidate that comics are literature over and over and over again. Like every few years, people think like comics aren't just for kids anymore. And like they have that.
I'm tired of hearing that. Yeah.
Like I'm sure that, I bet you've heard that news headline probably like 50 times.
Well, I mean, these people, the journalists who write about comics for mainstream newspapers and magazines, they don't know how to start any article about comics without saying, zap, pow, comics are not for kids anymore. I mean, please, to a certain degree, that was what was wrong with mainstream comics, was that they weren't for kids anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, the 90s, you had the bad girl comics with the hypersexualized women in their broke back poses. This was definitely not for kids anymore.
Yeah. But then
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
With the advent of graphic novels, now you do have comics that kids can read, and that's wonderful.
It's like I actually feel like it's harder to write literature for children. You have to be smart about writing, and then know how to edit it down for kids and make it smart enough for them without, like keeping that balance.
Without talking down to them.
Yeah.
I've written a lot for kids. I've wrote a graphic novel series, excuse me, called The Chicagoland Detective Agency, a 6-part graphic novel series, and a couple of other graphic novels also for younger readers. And really what it comes down to is you write what you want to write. You tell the story you want to tell, but without graphic sex and without graphic violence. And, if you can't tell a story without graphic sex and graphic violence, then you're not a very good writer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was thinking about that in the kids thing when you said that, you're a writer. I mean, as a cartoonist, you are a writer. You're just employing
Sure.
2 different modes of writing at the same time.
Yes.
Visual writing and then word writing. So
Yes.
it makes complete sense to me that you would then write and have...
Of course, because I know how the pages should look. I know how the panels should look. I know how to tell a story in panels because I've done it.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking the other day about the idea of the narration boxes serving one purpose, either sometimes like the narration boxes representing the brain and the pictures representing the heart of the story, or flip-flop.
That's nice.
I was thinking, because they have to work together. So one of them is going to show you the emotional truth, and one of them is going to show you just the factual. It's almost like your sun sign and your moon sign.
Uh-huh.
It's like what's happening on the surface, what's happening on the inside.
Well, they have to work together, of course.
Yeah, that's always hard for me. And I also recently been thinking about the idea of a page as a sentence and trying to just keep one idea on that page and see if...
That's nice.
Yeah. Those are just recent things I was thinking of when I was thinking about writing in comics and talking about it. What else did I want to ask you? Well, I want to ask you, of course, what advice you have for young cartoonists or up-and-coming cartoonists, specifically women, because that is generally who listens to the podcast, I think.
But not how do I get published, right?
No, well, I was like, please don't make me waste Trina Robbins' time. Telling you how to, I mean, people, that's like the question that will haunt me to my grave, and I feel happy answering it, but I have already answered it. I bet you've answered it.
Oh, God, yes. What advice? I mean, these are the best of times for women drawing comics, and it will only get better. It's not going to get worse. Just each advance we make in every way, in control over our own bodies, in equal pay, every advance we make, we have to make sure it doesn't get worse. You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I had this. Did you hear about what happened at Angoulême this year?
Of course.
Okay, good. Just for people that don't know, there was this huge grand prize, like a Lifetime Achievement Award, and they said the 30 names, and the 30 names were all men. And then they made it worse when people started boycotting them by saying, well, you know, we just can't help it. Not that many women draw comics, you see.
Yes, they said that.
It made it so much worse.
It's really kind of amazing that they're like dinosaurs, you know. There are still, just when you think that it's over, there are still men who are dinosaurs.
They are dinosaurs, and history is not going to look kindly upon these dinosaurs.
No.
And I mean, it's already not looking kindly. But when that happened, I thought maybe there needed to be another feminist revolution or official kind of conglomeration of women cartoonists. If that kind of thing happened, what do you think was useful? What would you bring? What do you think was useful from women's comics or from the thing that you built, the coalition that you built?
You mean like if suddenly we erected barricades and shouted to the Barricade Sisters and had political meetings and stuff?
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know if we really need that, but if that happened, I would certainly attend the meetings. And if there was anything I needed to say, I would say it. But really, there are so many wonderful women cartoonists now, and they're all younger than me. There isn't one woman cartoon. Well, I mean, the mainstream, Ramona Fraden and Marie Severin, but they're doing it. They're doing it. It's a constant, ongoing revolution. I don't need to bring anything to it.
Well, I think you already do, just by existing. Well, I want to say this book is beautiful. So, and I will tell people about the books. I just got them the other day, and I couldn't believe it. I ran into my classroom with them, and the students all rejoiced because I had been threatening to show these to them. I do a slideshow for my students called Nicole's Favorite Women and Queer Cartoonists.
Oh, great. Because
they're people that you don't hear about in the normal, comics classes or comics history classes. So I have a slideshow of people. And then I told them, this book's coming out. I hope I get a copy while we're still in class. And they were so excited to see it. And I cannot wait to break out my 3D glasses to look at the 3D issue. What a dream. So this is a total of about 700 pages of women's comics.
You should tell your students or anybody who listens to this podcast who happens to live in the Bay Area that on April 12th, we're having a signing at Green Apple Books on the Park. That's in San Francisco on 9th Avenue. It's called On the Park because it's a block away from Golden Gate Park. Mm-hmm. That'll be at 7:30. And a lot of us original women, I always like to pronounce it women with an I, that will be there to sign the book and talk about it.
Cool. Excellent. I will definitely tell people to go there. And then you guys will be you'll be at SPX. Is that true?
Yes, I will be at SPX and so will Fantagraphics and so will the Women's Comics Collection, which means I'll be sitting there at the Fantagraphics booth signing copies.
Excellent. And lastly, what are you working on next? Or are you working on anything next? What are your dream projects?
Okay, well, one dream project is done and simply has to see publication, which it will see in time for the San Diego Comic-Con. And that is another book that I edited. It's called Babes in Arms. And it's a collection of the work of 4 Golden Age women cartoonists who during the war, as you may know, as I bet you do know, maybe everyone doesn't know, that during the war, the Second World War, when all the guys went off to war, the women filled their places in all the industries, in the factories, making ships, making planes, driving trucks and buses that they'd never done before. And the same thing happened in the comics industry, that for the first time, because all the guy cartoonists were young, they were draft age or they enlisted and they were overseas fighting, the women filled their places in the comic book publishers too. So that, of course, there are more women drawing comics now than ever before. But at that point, there were more women drawing comic books than there had ever been before. So I picked 4 of the best Golden Age women cartoonists and collected their work in this book. It's published by Hermes Press. It's called Babes in Arms. And what they drew, it's called Babes in Arms because what they drew were beautiful, courageous women fighting the Axis, fighting the fascists and the Nazis, fighting the bad guys. And of course, these were women who didn't need to be rescued by the hero. Well, they were the heroes. So it's coming out in time for San Diego. I'll be there to sign it. It's really, I love the work of these women. So, okay. So that's a dream project that's done.
That's awesome.
My next dream project, do we have time for all this?
Yeah.
Okay. My next dream project I have just started working on. All right. I'm Jewish. My father came from a shtetl at the age of 16. He came to America from a shtetl in what is now Belarus, and he wrote in Yiddish. He wrote for the Jewish language newspapers, didn't get paid, so it was a lot like being an underground cartoonist. And he wrote a book, which he published in 1938, a book in Yiddish, called Armenian Yidden und andere Sachen, which means a bunch of Jews and other stuff, loosely translated. And growing up, I knew my father wrote in Yiddish. I knew he had written a book, but I didn't want anything to do with it because as a kid, I wanted to be American. I didn't want to be, some Yiddish-speaking person. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of really embarrassed or ashamed that my father wrote in Yiddish. Okay, many years later, I'm grown up. I appreciate it now. And it's, he died and it's too late. I figured the book is gone. I'll never find it. A book in Yiddish? What? Where will I find it? My wonderful, wonderful grown daughter found it on the internet. It has been reprinted and you can get print-on-demand copies from Abe Books. So I got a bunch of copies, and coincidentally, it's like there's kind of a cosmic hand very often in things that happen to me in regards to books and comics. Coincidentally, I had started taking Yiddish lessons simply because they were at my local LGBT center in the Castro, and they were free. And I said, wow, a language I've always wanted to learn, since I stopped being an obnoxious little kid. Mm-hmm. And so I got a hold of the book, but, the fact that I'm taking Yiddish lessons doesn't mean I can translate it. I had it translated, and I can see that what it is, it's a bunch of kind of almost word portraits of about 3/4 of the book takes place in his shtetl. Sorry. It's about people from his shtetl. That, where he lived until he was 16. And the next part, which is about 1/4 of the book, takes place in the Lower East Side in Brooklyn when he came to America. And I realized this has to be a graphic novel. So I've started working on it. I have a publisher, Hope Nicholson, who has published a couple of really, really good books and is currently publishing a book by Margaret Atwood. Mm-hmm. And I love her. I contributed to the book she did called Secret Love of Geek Girls, mm-hmm. which I really recommend it. It's a charming book, and I'm kind of happy with my little bitty contribution. And she's the publisher. We're doing a crowdfunding thing, Kickstarter, to get money because Hope is a really small publisher. I already have a cover artist. The cover artist is Willie Mendez, who was one of the earliest, in 1970, the only 2 women drawing comics in San Francisco were me and Willie Mendez. She was a contributor to It Ain't Me Babe Comics. She also has a couple of things, contributed a couple of pages to women's comics, but she has become a painter. Oh. She has a gallery in Los Angeles, the Barbara Mendez Gallery. Her art is perfect. What I wanted for the cover, I thought what I really want for the cover is Chagall. But alas, Chagall is dead. So I thought, okay, who alive would be perfect? And I realized it was Willie. And we have the contract. I haven't even sent it to her yet. I just received it this morning from Nicholson. But she wants to do it, and I know she'll go for the contract. The artists, I don't want to, because we can't afford until we get some money from Kickstarter. We can't really afford to pay them. I just want to know that they're committed to the book. Mm-hmm. So we have one artist who is doing a story on spec from the book, and that is my partner, Steve Lealoha, because how could he say no? But he's a great guy anyway, and he's doing one of the stories so that we will have a cover and one story to show when we get the other artists. And I'm figuring 2017 as a publication date.
That's great. Awesome. Well,
I'm very happy with it. I'm really thrilled with it.
I'm so happy to hear about your dream projects.
Yes.
Do you have any last words for my listeners?
These are wonderful times. I think I just said that. These are the best of times for women drawing comics. So, I'm just so happy. I'm just so happy to have all these wonderful women. And by the way, they're all so talented that it's a good thing I stopped drawing, because I could never compete with these women.
Wow. Trina Robbins, you are welcome in my house. I'm going to put a sign in my window.
When I pass your house and need to use the bathroom,
I'll make you a cup of coffee.
Great.
Maybe some water. I'll say, sister, you are welcome in my house.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to read this hate mail that you received. What did you call it? Some really wonderful hate mail. Dated till the matriarchy reigns again. This is from 1973?
I think so.
Dear FBI, you can't fool us. Who are you kidding? We see through you trying to undermine the women's/lesbian movement. We expose you for the dirty, filthy infiltrators you are. This is sent to Trina. You talent faggots, you crew-cut she-pricks, we are disgusted, appalled, and revolted by women's comics. You don't even know that the point of respelling women is to get the men out of it. I hated to see the way you degraded and debased women, especially the racist slurred Harriet Tubman, and the violence was really bad. That story about the Vikings made me want to throw up. At first, I thought it was real women writing the comic, but I know women couldn't do such a venomous, vile publication as yours. I hate it. You must really hate women. I'm so appalled and disgusted that I can't even think of more to say, though I would like to comment line by line. This is a very serious letter. I know you won't print it, but we will, through our own mysterious way. Pass the word and let women all over the country know you are infiltrators. I will, of course, not sign my name. We love letters. I bet you do. In our wonderful ways, we will squelch you. Because of your stupidity, your downfall will come and is inevitable. From Moonbeam, Labrys, and Sparkling Star.
What this says is more about them than about us. You have to remember that this was early days, so the identity search was on in those days, and so people who gathered together, usually in groups, had a fierce determination to survive and thrive. And what women's comics did was give a window to a great variety of expression. And we persisted in this. Actually, a conscious decision that the Women's Comics Collective here in San Francisco made was to, as near as possible, have half of the pages of every issue be devoted to new work. So we solicited beginners, and this was a serious decision, because although we were getting better and better in our artwork and our stories, it meant that the books weren't getting better and better. The books always had about half of the pages be amateur beginners. We felt that this was particularly important because there was no room in any of the underground guys' titles. So we were the only place where women from all over the world who were cartoonists could have their work exhibited. So we offended everybody. Everybody. So the variety of complaints were amazing and entertaining, and I'm glad that you saved this example.
Oh, it's precious. What you pointed out, after our first issue, we said we invited people to submit, and very soon we got lots of submissions. And the thing is that I think the women who submitted comics to us did it because they felt safe. The comics by the guys never solicited submissions. Never. They were just publishing their pals.
Right.
They didn't ask anyone else. And the women saw the very first issue of Women's, and it was like, oh my God, look, women are drawing comics. I can send something to them, and they won't be horrible and insulting, you know?
Well, I have a question. Can you describe, for the people who weren't there, what was the independent comic scene, at least in San Francisco, like before you started publishing this? Or at the time, what was it like?
It was a total boys' club. I mean, I came to San Francisco in 1970. In the 60s, I was living in New York, and I was drawing for the East Village Other, which was fine. It was just the very beginning of comics. And then Crumb did Zap 1, and it was like an amazing revelation to all of us. Then there's just a handful of people doing comics, and it was like, oh, you don't have to do this for a newspaper. You can actually do a comic book, just like Marvel and DC. It's really funny that none of us thought of that until Crumb did Zap. So I came to San Francisco in 1970, and it was the mecca of underground comics. It was where the comic book publishers were. Last Gasp, Print Mint, Apex, yes. But it was all guys. There was, in 1970, you didn't even come until later. There was me and Willie Mendez, and that was it. We were the two women doing comics. All the others were guys. They published each other. They published their panels. They ignored us completely. They didn't take us seriously. They weren't insulting to us when we met them or anything, but they just ignored us. And that's why I joined It Ain't Me, Babe.
It was interesting. The comic book field was dying. The straight comic books field was dying. And when I came to San Francisco, I was participating in Alternative Features Service, which me and a couple of guys were publishing for underground newspapers and for the few, very few, straight papers that would subscribe to us. And we produced illustrations and cartoons in addition to the articles. So we hired Trina, who wanted to produce Panthea, boom, boom, and meeting her, I learned that there was this entire world that I was not aware of underground comics. So it seemed, and us launching women's comics, that we could produce comics regularly, and they would be sold all over, and we would all become famous and rich. This turned out to be slightly mistaken, because underground comics did get into head shops, but not much else. And since women's comics had a great variety of stories, we couldn't get into the women's stores.
We actually were sold in women's bookstores.
A few. But mostly we would get back letters rejecting us because we had men in the stories or something. So although the women's comics title continued for years, it was mostly because of our determination rather than any monetary return.
I just want to say one thing, Lee. I've never really told you what it meant to me that you and Mal asked me to contribute to your syndicate, because nobody, as you know, was asking me, except the papers were. The underground papers were great. They weren't sexist pigs. But, the comic scene was just those horrible guys.
Yeah.
But you asked me to contribute. You even came to my house once a week for the weekly page that I did.
Right.
And that meant so much to me. So thank you.
Just on the side here, I think it's hard to imagine now how repressive the culture was, how little vehicles there were. When Trina and Lee are talking about this, I mean, there was nothing. And people didn't even realize that they could do something. because it just wasn't there. We were coming out of the 50s where everything was a job. Everything was straight. To be not straight was dangerous. And it was also, it was heavy. People threw things at you.
Did you really get things thrown at you?
As a hippie, when I was first a hippie, it was very, very hard. But I think the census, we were really, it's hard to describe that time. But everyone was so repressed that it was like a huge vortex of energy. When people started coming out, it was like one after the other, whether it was deaf liberation or black liberation or whatever. Everyone was starting to find it within 6 months, it seemed like.
The movements were all related, definitely. Black liberation, women's liberation, gay liberation, they were all related. And they all happened almost at once, didn't they?
Well, I was going to say, in your comics, I'm seeing intersectional feminism, and that, is a buzzword that's come up over the past few years of, like, young feminists, especially on Twitter, are reclaiming intersectional feminism, and they're like, we just made this up. And, and people are having me on panels to be like, wow, you're intersectional. What is that like? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? All oppressions are linked, obviously. But I really find that you
Sounds
told me
like a new sex preference.
a new sex,
Not another one.
an intersectional. But you displayed this very well, in your comics and in the things you published, and in being related to, gay liberation and deaf liberation and black liberation. You had all these things in these comics, and I don't know if it was before your time, but it was before it had a name that was trending in the way that it is now. Can you talk about your feelings about that?
I'd like to talk about it.
Please.
Because I'm a history person. And I really think we just replicate a lot of things over and over again. And what's curious to me is we visit these panels. Leslie Lee comes from a very professional comic book, the real comic book world, before she was sucked into the revolution. And Trina took so much shit from these guys. She didn't say that, but she took big prejudice. Yeah, I remember that. But in any event, I'm going back to 1840 here, and what I'm reading is that the women...
That's before our time, in case.
I don't know. I think it all keeps happening over again. There was a very big discussion, I don't know if you history people know this, between the women's suffrage movement and the anti-slavery movement, which was, what do we do first? Do we go for the women's vote, or do we go for abolition? And it basically decided abolition. But was also happening at that time was spiritualism, with women knocking on temples, because electricity had just been invented, and they saw no reason that if invisible message could go from Boston to New York, why couldn't it go from New York to heaven? Now imagine this state of mind. They thought this was a reasonable, extrapolation. Anyway. This was called spiritualism, and electricity was seen as female. So as all these sort of things were happening, it came together an incredible vortex of people, kind of blossoming in this way. And I think we felt that exactly in the 70s. I don't know what the next moment is. That's always my question. But I think, I'm always looking at history, and I'm always looking at the thing that hasn't been done, the thing that's not being said.
Gosh, there are so many things I want to talk about based on everything you've all mentioned so far. I just want to know, at the time that you were making comics, you mentioned safety or danger, or getting things thrown at you. It wasn't necessarily safe. If I'm reading a comic from the 70s by someone like R. Crumb, I'm seeing women's bodies used as objects in an almost grotesque way, and people of color.
Not almost grotesque.
Let's go ahead and let's cut through the chase and say grotesque. And people of color's bodies used and characterized in, I'll say, grotesque ways. And so as a woman or a person of color reading that, one wouldn't necessarily feel safe in that environment. But your comics not only jumped into that fray as women drawing comics, but the content was very female and about women owning their bodies. A lot of it is about sex. A lot of it is about, getting underground abortions, or what to do, or feeling used, or feeling worthless, or your worth being tied up in your looks, or whatever. But you were doing that in a time where it took a lot of bravery because it wasn't a safe space. So
I don't think we felt brave. We just felt like we had to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, it was all about self-expression. We what's interesting is during those days, we didn't know that this was the first or this was the only.
Yeah.
We just did it.
Yeah.
And in reflecting the times and our relationship to the times, it provided a huge window on what was happening there. We didn't find these stories anyplace else. We couldn't find them in the magazines of the day. We didn't find them in the books of the day. So we created these things that were from the pain, the angst, the insights that we personally had at the time. It was an amazing venue to be able to express yourself personally and get it printed. And that in itself was a return. We didn't have good sales numbers or anything, and we sure as hell didn't get paid enough money for any of this. But
no one did.
But that was true. No one got paid enough. And
we didn't care if we got paid.
No, we didn't.
No, we didn't.
That was such an amazing reward that there weren't any independent comics or anything at the time. The underground comics became independent comics later on, but at the time, this was it.
Nicole, you mentioned, you started talking about Crumb and the grotesque representations. Well, there had been a mainstream comics like Marvel and DC. They had a code, a comics code, and everybody who did comics for them had to adhere to the code, which was very restrictive. Excuse me. So one of the things about undergrounds was there was no comics code. You could do whatever you wanted. So what happened, unfortunately, is that there was an enormous amount of hatred of women on the part of these guys, and it really, it came out because they could do whatever they wanted, and all too often what they wanted. And Crumb was certainly the leader, but all the other guys did it too, because it was like almost fashionable, was to depict women raped and mutilated and murdered, and I, of course, would object. I would say, but this is real. I don't think I even used the word misogyny. I don't think I knew that word yet. I just said this is so hostile to women. And, of course, as a result, because I dared open my mouth, I was called a censor. They didn't really understand that the First Amendment means you can criticize things. And, that's yet another reason why the guys ignored me. And I was very aware of the fact that if I just shut my mouth and was a nice girl, I might get accepted by them. But I couldn't do that. I literally could not do that.
And Mary, did it feel safe for you? Because you were saying, if you came out in your comics, you would never get a teaching job again. And that's real. As a teacher of kids, I have that internalized homophobia that when kids find out that I'm an adult or a queer person or that I've ever talked about having sex in public, that I will never get a job teaching or near children again. And it's 2017. So at the time, did it feel unsafe or strange for you to be making gay comics as a woman, which is, even worse than just being a woman as being a gay woman?
I think going back to what Lee said is we just did it. And part of it was the incredible repression that we grew up in the 1950s, which maybe a few people can imagine, but I didn't know what sexual intercourse was till I was 13 years old. And
none of us did.
I said, no, that can't be true. There's no 13-year-old on the planet who doesn't know now, thank God. And then it was huge to figure that out. And I didn't believe it for a while either. And I didn't even hear the word lesbian until I was 19.
Oh, wow.
It doesn't even exist anymore. So also, I see young people, they're smarter about their feelings, they're smarter about their identities. we grew up with such repression that when we discovered it's like jumping into warm water. You know, you get to say the word, you get to think the thought. You know, and there was huge turmoil going on around us. Grew up in Chicago. Fred Hampton was mowed down. There were bloody mattresses hauled out. Mayor Daley's cops were there. It was a war, but everyone felt it. I don't know what people are feeling now, but it's great that all this openness is there. I don't think people feel any fear at all about publishing and saying anything.
Thank you this week to Shoshana Ruth Wechter. Have you ever noticed we don't have ads? It's true. I don't tell you about some gross shrimp scampi dish from Blue Apron. It's because we don't take ads right now. However, we do take tips. Please tip producer Chris. Chris Sutton does this out of the goodness of his heart, and he's expecting a baby. You can send Chris a tip by PayPaling hornetleg@gmail.com and say, tip Chris, or something about the podcast. And then we'll thank you on the air. I'll sing your name if you want. Hornetleg, HORNETLEG @gmail.com. Thank you for your support. You keep the podcast free and ad-free. Adios. You know, you all have you've been around through, lots of different cycles of Republicans being in power and Democrats and Republicans and scandal and repression and, everything. What are your thoughts about right now? Because, Trina, I had you on the podcast, and the three of you I've talked to at CCA, but these were all pre-Trump. Not to say the Voldemorty kind of name of it, but he won't appear, I promise. But this is all pre-Trump, so how are you faring in the Trump era, and has your experience informed your survival strategies or activism now?
Well, we're all the resistance now, aren't we? We're obviously not going to go back, so fuck him.
What's really unusual about this is he's like our parents. He's such a throwback to an earlier time.
Yeah, my parents were not like that.
You know what I'm saying. He's a throwback to the Hugh Hefner era, who's kind of the last hurrah of the white man. That's sort of how I see it. And what's unusual about this is that everyone that we know is on the same side. There's not this internecine fighting about, gee, you didn't say it right, I'm going to write you this horrible letter, and you're not revolutionary enough. We're all terrified. But as Alison Bechtel said, we feel a little weird that we're no longer in the revolutionary counterculture. We're cool now. It's weird to be cool and be a lesbian.
But I also thought you were cool.
The minute after I was so mad at Trina, and then of course the minute we met each other, we just sort of fell in love right away. We started with each other, but it's interesting because it's a huge resistance now. From most of the major cities. So it's not like you're the only ones. It's not like you're going to get mowed down by a machine gun or all those things. Although, of course, let's not forget that in other countries it's quite different.
Well, I think we all have a responsibility, and I'm including the audience now, to do everything we can to resist. I participated in every march you can think of since November, and I'm sure some of you were in the Women's March as well. But going forward, participating in John Ossoff's campaign, in phone banks and such, I'm participating as well. And what I've found is that there's an amazing new group of people that I had never run into before. These are little old ladies and little old men who are outraged. And so for them, this is the first time they've been activated.
Wow. Yeah.
So I find it very weird but comforting that I have the mainstream as my comrades to do all these activities. It's just bizarre. But they drink Coke just like I do. They're friendly like I am. So it's kind of discovering the mainstream in a way that I never have before. And although the grassroots level is very far from Washington, D.C., I think the resistance is going to not only persist, but to triumph over the long term.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine wrote a pamphlet called Making Art During Fascism, and she was leading groups, almost like group therapy for artists after the election, because after the election, artists that she knew were immediately like, maybe I shouldn't be an artist. Maybe this is a narcissistic waste of time. I should become a lawyer or a doctor or join the Human Rights Campaign or something. But we were talking about the value of art during repressive times like this. Can you speak to the value of art in harsh political climates? Or because all of representation
is repressed.
Huh?
Are we repressed?
Well, before women's liberation, I think before there were representations of women taking back their bodies, possibly.
We're not repressed, but the government Trump is representing a view that's about 60 years old.
Mm-hmm.
He's
I would say 100 years old.
Yeah, he really is. And so we're all unrepressedly saying this is ridiculous. I mean, it's not just bad, it's absurd. So I just think he's going to fail.
Of course he will.
Yeah, he's just going to fail and be swept away, and we got to hang on.
I appreciate that perspective. I like that a lot.
Well, as I said before, we won't go back. Once you know what is true, you can't say, oh, that wasn't true, because you know it was true. Simple as that. I'm lucky because my parents were left-wing. They weren't at all on Trump. And, even though, of course, it was the 50s, and there was a lot that they weren't terribly hip about because they couldn't help it. They were that generation. But they were left-wing, and they understood, and they were very permissive. So I was born a bohemian, so I didn't have to become one. Mm-hmm. But the point is that, as I say, my parents were left-wing. They told me truths. In bringing me up left-wing, I knew the truth. And how could you deny it? How could you say, no, this isn't right?
Mm-hmm. Well, my parents started out kind of left. We were living in Montgomery, Alabama, and my dad at that time was a pediatrician, a brilliant guy. He went to medical school when he was 16.
Whoa, wow.
And one day when I was 12, we were doing errands for my mother. And so we stopped, and there was a bunch of policemen hassling a bunch of black guys. And we were stopped in the traffic while this went on. And my dad said, all of this has been made up. We have created all of these systems, all of the governments, all of the infrastructure. And it can be changed any time. And that stuck with me when he, first of all, getting into the military, and then getting into the Surgeon General's office, and then getting into the Pentagon, and then eventually into the Nixon/Ford White House. He was co-opted by the system. But I stayed just like the little kid in Montgomery, Alabama. So, following his instructions, I saw that all of this we have created, and we can create it again. So, I find the current times totally discouraging, but also inspiring, because we have a challenge to live up to and make real everything we could have imagined before the election, after the election. But you have to actually do things. You can't just be sitting in your house, being upset, yelling at the television, or yelling at your computer, or yelling at your iPhone. You need to actually do things in order for all this to change. In the 70s, we created comics, and that changed eventually how comics, the contents of comics, even mainstream comics. So it's on you guys.
That's easy, Lee.
That's wonderful.
We're going to be around a little longer, you guys.
Let's say goodbye to everybody tonight. Well, let's talk about Wonder Woman for a second. We have so many things to talk about. We're really hopping back and forth. But I almost cried many times. I did cry one time. I felt she was such a noble Wonder Woman. You know, so respectable. She was not overly sexualized in a disappointing way. She was powerful and true. How does it feel to see this? And also, Trina, you said you were the second woman to ever write a Wonder Woman comic.
I didn't write it, I drew it.
You drew it.
I was the first woman to draw a Wonder Woman comic, but Ramona Fradon had drawn Wonder Woman in Super Friends in 1970. But I did draw a 4-part Wonder Woman comic in 1986, and that was like 45 years after Wonder Woman was created, and she had been continually drawn by men, of course. Mm-hmm. And I've written some Wonder Woman comics since then and hope to do more.
How do you like the new Wonder Woman?
Oh, God, I love it. I have to say the first time I didn't cry, but the second I saw it twice. The second time I did cry. And, because it's so powerful.
Well, I feel the same way. I feel like there was a little bit too many men in the Wonder Woman. But I was like, God, why would you spend so much time with those guys? It's like, I guess to show how noble.
It wasn't perfect. Nothing is perfect. I was on a panel at a convention in Sacramento last weekend, and we talked. The panel was about the movie, and they asked us to rate the movie. And I simply said, well, because nothing in this life is perfect, I'll give it a 9 3/4.
Sagittarian Matters is produced by Chris Sutton, with assistance by Panyo Georges. Our theme music is composed by Carolyn Pennypacker Riggs of the band Bouquet. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.